Andy, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for that welcome. Since I started this job at the beginning of the year, I've been really grateful for the opportunity to visit so many schools, nurseries and colleges. You can read a lot of briefing papers in this job. You can talk to a lot of officials at the department, but nothing beats seeing for yourself and meeting the people who make education live. Now, of course, no two schools are the same, but what I've seen everywhere that I've visited is this enormous passion, enormous level of commitment and dedication of the sort that you just don't see in every profession. With so many teachers telling me how deeply they love what they do, the creativity, the freedom, the joy of learning and of developing young minds. And looking around this conference hall, I know that all of you want to lead great schools, to create the culture where teachers love their jobs and where children do their best. Now, as Secretary of State for Education, my simple ambition is for all children, whatever their background, to be able to go to a good school where they're inspired to learn and can fulfill their potential. I want us together to narrow the gap for the places left behind and provide better opportunities for those children who've had the hardest start in life. And in aiming for this, I know that in education, there is nothing more important than the people who are making it happen. And when I ask people I meet to think back to their own days at school, what it was that made a difference, what really sticks in their mind, I've yet to hear anyone mention a smartboard, or a computer, or a textbook, or an exam. It's always about Miss Smith or Mr. Davis, because, as you know, there can be no good schools without good teachers, and there can be no great schools without great teachers. And great teachers, of course, thrive under great leaders, which is why I want to work with you, determined to champion this profession, working with you to raise its status, helping to attract and retain more brilliant people to teach in our schools. In short, I will do everything I can to make sure teaching remains one of the most fulfilling jobs there is. One of my most urgent tasks, therefore, is to look at the barriers that can drive teachers and leaders out of the profession or may put people off coming into it in the first place. And I think top of that list is workload. Now, as we know, workload can come from a number of different places. Sometimes it can come from schools themselves and particular policies on marking or data collection, for example. And of course, it can come from government, from specific requirements that are placed on schools. But it can also come indirectly from the pressures inherent in the accountability system. And today, I'm going to talk quite a lot about those pressures and about that system. Now, I don't need to tell anybody in this hall that accountability is vital. Children only get one shot at an education, and we owe it to them that they can get the best. So when they are being let down, we need to act quickly so nobody ends up left behind. But that sort of action is rarely needed. In fact, standards in our classrooms are higher than ever, with 89% of schools, 90% of your primary schools rated Ofsted good or outstanding. Now, that's not to say that the system that we have right now works perfectly. We all know that if we went outside of this conference and spoke to somebody on the street about regional schools commissioners, Ofsted, MATs, coasting, below the floor, you might get a pretty blank look back. But what I found from speaking to many of you over the last few months is that even within the profession, within this sector, there can be quite some confusion. Confusion about the different actors within the system, who has the power to do what and on what basis, the exact circumstances that could lead to enforced structural or leadership change at a school. And all of this means that the spectre of the accountability system can loom large over schools. Fear of inspection, fear of a single set of bad results, fear of being forcibly turned into an academy. All of this can create stress and anxiety, and that can percolate through the staff. Ladies and gentlemen, we can do better than this. As members of NAHT, you are, of course, doing your own thinking about accountability, and I want to work closely with you on that. But I also wanted to come here today with something that I think is itself very important. School leaders need better clarity on how the accountability system will operate, the consequences that can flow from it, and the roles of the actors within it. So I'm publishing today a statement that sets out key principles for how we see the system working in future. The next step will be to consult with you and colleagues on the details. Now, of course, I urge everyone to read the statement in full, but in essence, it comes down to this. We have very many excellent schools in this country, schools with great leaders and great teachers. And I have a clear message to these schools and their leaders. I trust you to get on with the job. Ladies and gentlemen, I trust that you know better than us, better than me, better than the Department for Education, how to improve your schools. And you don't need government getting in your way. Now, of course, we will take action where a school is failing, on those occasions where, frankly, the leadership isn't there to make the improvements that are needed. Then we must act decisively and make structural change where that is necessary. But those are measures of last resort. And I believe every school should be absolutely clear on the rare circumstances where this could happen and when it won't. Ofsted is the body that can provide an independent, rounded judgment of a school's performance. Data alone can't tell that whole story. So I want to move to a system where, when it comes to educational underperformance, we only enforce academy conversion, leadership change, or changing the trust that a school is part of when there's been an Ofsted inadequate judgment. So that means we will not be forcibly turning schools into academies unless there is that judgment. Now, I firmly believe that becoming an academy can bring enormous benefits to schools and their pupils. Increasingly, becoming an academy also means schools coming together in a multi-academy trust, sharing expertise, working collaboratively, driving improvement. And hundreds of schools every year voluntarily choose that route to become an academy, to join a multi-academy trust. And I want that to be a positive choice for more and more schools. So I want to move away from forced academisation being seen as this punitive threat that can also hang over schools that are not failing. Now, we must have a system that does more than just deal with failure, which is why we'll work to identify schools which are at risk, but we'll do so in the right way, making a clear offer of support for the current school leadership. This support would come from teaching schools or other high-quality school improvement providers, people with a proven track record. And I intend this to replace the current confusing system of having both a below-the-floor standard and a coasting standard for performance. There will be a single, transparent data trigger at which schools will be offered support in this way. And we'll consult on how this single measure will work. As I said earlier, school leaders above this threshold will know they have the full freedom to get on with their job without interference. What does this mean for how we work with schools? I know that right now, schools can sometimes feel accountable to multiple masters. Regional school commissioner representatives going into schools and performing visits that can feel a lot like inspections, making additional requests for data. And that's something that's come about for well-intentioned reasons, but it can be confusing for schools. And I'm afraid it does play its part in helping to create a culture that drives some unnecessary workload for you and your teachers. Ladies and gentlemen, this will end. Ofsted inspectors are the people who should be inspecting schools. The clue is in the name. Commissioners commission, Ofsted inspectors inspect, which means no more RSC-initiated visits that can feel like inspections, with those extra demands for data adding to bureaucracy. More time for schools to get on with the job that they're doing well. I've been talking here about the standard of education provided in schools, but I'll also be looking at how we can support schools that are in financial trouble or take action where there's been a serious breakdown of governance. I'll be setting up more rigorous oversight and challenge when it comes to the financial performance of academy trusts. And there must also be improvements. And there must also be improvements in the governance of MATs as they grow in size and number, and in how we, on behalf of the public, hold them to account. And again, we'll seek your views on that. Now, the need to bear down on workload is not a new thing. In 2014, the Department for Education launched the Workload Challenge. Thousands took part, and overwhelmingly people talked about the sheer volume of lesson planning, of marking, of data management, which was too often being driven by fear of inspection rather than for the benefit of the child. And since then, we've worked closely with Ofsted and others to bust myths about inspections. And I recently made a video with a clear message with myself alongside Amanda Spielman, committing to schools that you won't be judged for cutting back on excessive bureaucracy. And let me say again, neither Ofsted nor the DFE require you to do things like annotated seating plans, triple marking, deep marking, dialogic marking, colour-coded marking, or excessive monitoring of a child's progress. Please watch that video and share it. And if anyone does tell you that Ofsted require the school to do this or that, please show them that video too. There's more to come from us on this. One area which many of you have raised with me is how the pressure to collect assessment data and evidence of progress has grown dramatically over the years. In response, we've established a workload advisory group to look into this issue and publish recommendations. And I'm pleased to announce that this group will be chaired by Professor Becky Allen, and the membership would include teachers and school leaders, as well as Ofsted and the unions, and I very much welcome NAHT's commitment to take part. As I visit more and more schools, I also discover that there isn't actually a uniform story on workload. Teachers' experiences are different in different places, and schools' policies and practices are very different too. So I urge you to ask questions too, questions like, do we need this much data collection? What does this extra time spent marking really add? And yes, government, of course, has responsibility too. In our drive to raise standards these last 7 years, we've made great strides together. But the pace of change has been fast, and that's why I've said that there will be no more new statutory tests or assessments for your schools beyond those that have already been announced for the rest of this Parliament. And I'll continue to work with NAHT and others to make sure that schools can successfully embed and have time to adapt to the changes that have already been announced and are coming through. Of course, all of us here have a shared goal of making sure teaching remains an attractive, fulfilling profession. Yes, teacher numbers are at an all-time high and more people are returning to teaching this year. But still we know that staff turnover is a real challenge for your schools. Actually, not just for schools. With record employment, there's been increased demand for talented graduates altogether. We've brought in schemes like the student loan reimbursement pilot for new graduates, but we need to go further. And that's why over the coming months, we'll be developing an overall recruitment and retention strategy. we'll take an unflinching look at the things that discourage people from coming into teaching or make them consider leaving. We'll also look at how we support teachers to get better at what they do and hone their expertise, as well as career progression, whether they want to get into leadership as you have or stay and develop in the classroom. I particularly want to support teachers early in their careers, when I know some new teachers feel a bit like having been thrown in at the deep end before they've learned really to swim. And so I'm pleased we're setting out our initial response to the QTS consultation today. Following strong support, I can announce that we'll be introducing an enhanced offer of support for new teachers, including extending the induction period to 2 years. And we'll work with the profession to develop a new early career framework that will set out the training and mentoring a teacher is entitled to in those first years. I'm committed to working with the profession to understand how to deliver these proposals and the resources that are needed to make them work. It's not just the early years, though. I want teachers to be able to develop and progress through clearer career pathways, including for those, as I said, who want to stay in the classroom as experts. You've said you want professional qualifications, including in a specialist subject, so we'll work with the sector to support those new qualifications. I'm also announcing a pilot of something that's been called for by the profession for some time, a new £5 million sabbaticals pilot. This will allow more established teachers to do something else for a period, whether that's working in an industry relevant to their field or doing academic research, or indeed coming to DFE to help shape policy. Now, finally, I want to turn to an issue which I know is top of your minds. And I certainly don't pretend that I can just stand up here at this podium and say a few words that will solve all the challenges you face in your schools today. It is true that schools get more funding than they used to, but it's also true that society asks more of schools than it did a generation ago. It is true that if we compare ourselves to other countries, according to the latest OECD data, per pupil, our schools get more government funding than, for example, Germany or France or Japan. But there have also been real cost pressures on schools, for example, in pensions and national insurance. So yes, I know it is challenging for schools managing the budget. And I do pledge to work with you to bear down on the cost pressures as best we can, working closely with you to make sure schools can get the best deals possible and target precious resources at the front line. I want a close, collaborative relationship with you, with this profession, whether on reforming accountability or reducing the data burden, strengthening professional development or reducing cost pressures. I'm clear that our retention and recruitment strategy would be nothing without your voices, your expertise, heads, teachers, support staff and unions. We have a powerful opportunity to raise the status of this profession, for teaching to remain one of society's most fulfilling roles, meaning every child has the chance to fulfill their potential. And I pledge to work with you to make this a reality. Thank you.